big story of the day remains the ouster of Bill O'Reilly at Fox News. So the biggest host in the history of Fox News is now out on his rear, and that is an amazing thing. I mean, it's obviously a sort of earth-shattering move when it comes to the media. And there's a reason why this happened, and that is that all of these women were coming forward and telling stories about how Bill O'Reilly was hitting on them. They were all coming forward and saying that Bill O'Reilly had tried to solicit them for sex, and then when they had not given in, then he had refused to help them with their careers. That basically he held out the carrot of, I'll help you with your career if you have sex with me, and then he had backed off of that the minute that they wouldn't, or he had called them up on the phone and said dirty things to them. All of this is bad stuff, and he had settled out apparently many, many times, and Fox News had settled out many, many times. They did an internal review of all of O'Reilly's supposed escapades, and they had Paul Weiss, which is a major law firm, do the internal review, and apparently there was a split in the Murdoch family. Rupert wanted to keep Bill O'Reilly, and the sons wanted to get rid of Bill O'Reilly because they thought that he was a liability now. A lot of advertisers had dropped out, and this, I think, is the first thing to say. The first thing to say is that there is a real tendency on the right to run from people because they've lost their advertisers. And the left knows this, and that's why Media Matters has been used for years as the tip of the spear in fighting the right-wing media. When we were at Truth Revolt, we tried to apply the same tactics to MSNBC, and we were actually successful. We wanted to establish a mutually assured destruction. Here is my view. Advertisers should generally not be boycotted based on the shows upon which they advertise. I think secondary boycotts are generally not a good thing. I think they create a less free culture in America. It's not a legal thing, but it is a culture thing. If the idea is you don't like Bill O'Reilly and so you're going to boycott his advertisers, then you are effectively cracking down on a certain amount of free speech. Not that you can't do it legally, not that it's not in some cases moral to do it, but as a general rule, this kind of ease with which we do this now, where we call up advertisers and say that we're going to boycott your company unless you pull advertising from a particular show. This is how the left really slammed Rush Limbaugh after the Sandra Fluck incident. This is how the left has gone after people like Michael Savage. The left has also gone after, obviously, now Bill O'Reilly. So Media Matters basically astroturfed 500 or 1,000 people to call up the advertisers on Fox News and say, we don't want to see your commercial on Bill O'Reilly, or we're going to pull all the money. They've done this to Glenn Beck as well. Basically, if you're anybody on the right and you've reached a certain level of notoriety, the left will at some point attempt to go after your advertisers, which is really nasty stuff. And advertisers should know going forward that this stuff happens, that there is astroturfed attempts to destroy particular hosts because the left wants to destroy the host, not because the advertisers are really in any danger. Usually if 500 people sort of in the advertising industry, they don't want controversy, and they are not interested in having 500 people call their headquarters, and so the easiest thing to do is just pull your ad and put it someplace else where you can get an equal number of eyeballs. But it would be great to see advertisers actually do a little bit of deeper digging and see whether it's Media Matters creating a list serve that they send out to 100,000 people and then 500 of them call, or whether it's actually 500 potential clients of the advertiser who have decided they're really, really angry, whether there's really widespread outrage over all of this. Now, that's point number one, is that just because boycotting on O'Reilly worked doesn't mean that boycotting in general is a good tactic or a worthwhile tactic or a useful tactic, particularly with mainstream commentators of either side. I think that's sort of a problem. The second point here is the O'Reilly-specific points. That one's not specific to O'Reilly because this happens, as I say, to a lot of conservative hosts from time to time in their career, which is why, for example, you will see, and the right doesn't engage in this. The right will not boycott advertisers because they advertise on Chris Hayes or Rachel Maddow. The left will boycott advertisers, or at least say they're going to boycott advertisers based on stuff that based on them advertising on Sean Hannity's show, for example. And that's why when you watch Fox News, a lot of the advertisers are gold companies or walk-in shower companies, and when you watch MSNBC, it's all institutional advertisers, meaning car companies, beer companies, because even though MSNBC has way lower ratings than Fox News. And the reason for that is obvious, and that's because these advertisers are wary of being slammed with bad publicity. Now, boycotts work on both sides, and in some cases I think boycotts are justified. Like, I think that you're perfectly within your rights to say, I don't feel like going to Target if I'm afraid that I'm going to bring my child into a bathroom, and then a man's going to walk into the bathroom in the girl's bathroom. I think that's perfectly legit. It's a perfectly responsible action. I don't think it's legit when you say, I don't like the point of view on this particular show, therefore I'm boycotting the advertiser on this particular show. That's directed at the exercise of free speech. Again, legal, I don't think it's particularly moral. I'm not a big fan of it. So that's point number one. Point number two is the O'Reilly specific point. And this is a real problem for the right. So there are a bunch of women who have now come out and made allegations about Bill O'Reilly. Margaret Hoover was one of the women who used to be on Fox News a fair bit. And yesterday she was talking about never being alone in a room with Bill O'Reilly.
Bill O'Reilly never hit on me. Bill O'Reilly never sexually harassed me. I will say, though, as a young woman, many of us have experiences that are uncomfortable. And I had some experiences that were uncomfortable enough for me to know never to put myself in a position where I was alone with Bill or alone with people that made me feel uncomfortable. And so when I first read Gretchen's complaint, and when Gretchen Carlson's complaint, who was really the hero and the unsung hero of all of this story, because she is the one woman who stood up in the face of a culture that was condoning bad behavior for years and years and years and years, it was eminently believable because there was just a feel of interacting at times that was deeply uncomfortable, and it was easy for me to extrapolate that if I hadn't been doing things to protect myself, that I might have ended up in a position where I could have been vulnerable.
Okay, so there's a point she makes here that I think is kind of amusing in one sense. She says that she makes a point never to be alone in a room with a man. And the entire left goes, yeah, that makes perfect sense because men are pigs. Mike Pence says he makes a point never to be alone in a room with a woman, and the entire left goes insane, right? I mean, and his assumption is that men are pigs. So Mike Pence makes the exact same assumption as Margaret Hoover, and Margaret Hoover is right and Mike Pence is wrong. But the broader point that she's making is that there was a culture at Fox News that tolerated this sort of stuff. Kirsten Powers says the same thing. Here's what she said.
I was on air actually with Margaret Hoover, who's at CNN now, on a regular segment. We were on every Monday, and he got Margaret's name wrong, and Margaret said, hey, get my name right. And he said, oh, I'm sorry, there's a lot of blondes in this operation. I can't keep you all straight. Megyn Kelly's coming up, starts throwing all these blonde names. And then at the end of the segment says, thank you for your blondness to both of us. So I went to his executive producer and I said, he needs to apologize and he needs to never do that again, or I'm not doing his show anymore. And I was told basically, well, you know, Bill, there's nothing we can do about it. He's a throwback. He's kind of an Archie Bunker. And I said, well, if you mean he's a Neanderthal, then we're on the same page. He can never do that again. I'm a political analyst here. Went to Bill, came back, said, no, he's not going to apologize. So then I went to I was called into my boss's office. I was told, what can we do? It's Bill. There's nothing we can do. You know, we're sorry this happened to you, but there's nothing we can do. I complained to Roger Ailes. I was told the same exact thing. There's nothing we can do. It's Bill. He's a jerk. Nobody likes him. And then Roger said, you know, Bill, he likes to put up dirty pictures and ask pretty girls to talk about them.
Okay, so the idea that you know, O'Reilly would have to apologize for the fact that Fox News has lots of blondes on the air, and he made a comment about it. I think that's a bit of a stretch. I mean, let's be real about this. Fox News has lots of blondes on the air. I mean, I think that there is definitely a blonde affirmative action program that exists at Fox News, and you know, making a comment about it, that is not even close to the bad stuff that Bill O'Reilly is accused of doing. I mean, there's an entire list of bad things that Bill O'Reilly has been accused of doing. This one does not even chart. But here is the problem. There was indeed a culture at Fox News that basically was tolerant of what appears to be a lot of allegations of sexual harassment, not just about O'Reilly, but also about Roger Ailes, of course. Roger Ailes was said to have said really dirty things and threatened people's jobs based on their refusal to have sex with him. All of that is deeply troubling stuff. And as far as the O'Reilly allegations, I always find it hard to believe that none of the allegations are true when you have like 10 allegations. There's a bunch of allegations about this whole shtick. There's people who Andrea Macris, who's one of his producers, who I knew when she actually had me on O'Reilly's show a while ago. She won, I think, a $10 million settlement from O'Reilly. That was the famous case where he was calling her up in the middle of the night allegedly, and then he was suggesting that there was that she used a loofah and all this kind of stuff. You know, that sort of stuff. Too many allegations to simply dismiss all of them. I'll give you a quick list. Andrea Macris receives that $9 million settlement after O'Reilly allegedly made sexual references to her via phone. Former guest Wendy Walsh accused O'Reilly of offering to help her at Fox but cutting her dead when she refused his sexual advances. Former guest Juliet Huddy received $1.6 million settlement from Fox News after she alleged that he made sexual phone calls to her and then tried to harm her career. Former host Andrea Tanteros filed a lawsuit against O'Reilly and Roger Ailes, who was ousted last year after similar allegations. Lori Dew similarly sued both over similar allegations, received a settlement in excess of $1 million. Former host Rebecca Gomez-Diamond alleged sexual phone calls from O'Reilly. And then there was a report this week from attorney Lisa Bloom that one of her clients was called hot chocolate by O'Reilly, and that O'Reilly leered at her. There's some people who write this kind of stuff off. I don't, as somebody who works in an office and runs an office, I don't think it's appropriate for people to be acting in this manner. I think just as a gentleman, forget about the office environment, just a gentleman, it's not appropriate to be acting in this manner. And there was a tolerance of this sort of behavior, obviously up to and including Roger Ailes and by Roger Ailes also. And that's a big problem. Now, the reason that I point this out is not to suggest that all males are pigs and all males are sexual harassers and that there's a rape culture in the United States. What it is to suggest is that powerful people are able to get away on both sides of the aisle with behavior that would have the rest of us in serious trouble. And that's a problem. And that's not just because powerful people are able to manipulate the system. That's also because we as citizens look up to powerful people, people we see on TV a lot, people who are in politics, and we are willing to excuse their sins based on the fact that we like all the other things that they are saying and doing. So Wendy Walsh, who was one of the people who sued O'Reilly or alleged bad activity by O'Reilly, she spoke out yesterday and she talked about O'Reilly and Trump. And remember, Trump defended O'Reilly over all of these allegations originally.
Would you like to see the President of the United States address it? Do you think it was appropriate for him to do it in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, doesn't he have better things to do? We got a problem with Korea right now and Syria. I mean, come on. But I do think these two are birds of a feather. They're men of a certain generation who thought of women as, ornaments in workplaces. And I'm hoping, I have faith in the president's daughter, Ivanka, that she is going to do more for women than her father.
Okay, so the reason that I have a problem with Republicans going along with all of this, like Democrats always went around, so the hypocrisy point, Democrats always went along with this, right? Democrats are fine with Bill Clinton sexually molesting the help. They don't have any problem with that whatsoever. When it's on the right side of the aisle, it's the end of the world. But this is a tendency that now crosses the aisle. I was always under the impression that people on my side of the aisle, people on the right, were not willing to stand for bad behavior just because you happen to agree with somebody. It's one thing if the allegations are not credible, or it's one allegation that gets settled out of court for purposes of just getting it off the table. But if it's multiple allegations, you do not look askance at the people who are alleging it if it's tons and tons of allegations just because you like the guy. It's one thing if the allegations are not credible. But again, if you have lots of credible allegations, lots of settlements out of court, the law firm at Fox News saying this is a problem, then you do have to look at yourself and determine whether the reason that you are supporting a character is because you think that they are in the right and truly innocent, or is the reason you're supporting the character because you agree with a lot of the things that they have to say. And that is a problem because it means the hijacking of particular philosophies about character, about life, about the economy, about everything, simply because you like a lot of what the guy is saying. And we saw this with regard to polls about Trump, that say that now more Republicans than Democrats think it's okay for a politician to cheat on his wife or have sex outside of marriage. That's only due to Trump. And that's because there's a follow the leader mentality that is natural to human beings that we all have to fight. And the idea of having a good ideology, a good philosophy, a good religious perspective is that you follow principle above personality. Okay, so the reason that I lead with all this O'Reilly stuff and the tendency, the human tendency of attempting to swallow the bad along with the good, that somebody does something bad and now we're just going to go along with them the whole way, is this involves a certain amount of corruption of the soul, and that means corruption of the political soul. And the perfect example of this, it is, aside from the sexual stuff with Trump and O'Reilly, there's a tendency, because people like Donald Trump, that they're going to swallow his agenda wholesale, even stuff that is clearly heretical to basic conservative principles. So today, perfect example, today, Breitbart News runs a piece in which they basically say that there is a libertarian case for Trumpian redistributionism, right? They run this is actually written in Breitbart News today. It's called The Libertarian Case for Donald Trump's Buy American Order. John Carney writes, he says, today's critics of trade orthodoxy are so far removed from those of the past that perhaps we shouldn't call them protectionists at all. Let's call them what they are, economic nationalists. No. Protectionists are protectionists. He says, but here's the part that's crazy. He says, it is altogether possible that one may prefer lower living standards in favor of a more humane distribution of wealth, or a government procurement policy that recycles dollars taxed and borrowed back into the domestic economy. I'll read that again because it's insane. Okay, it is altogether possible one may prefer lower living standards in favor of a more humane distribution of wealth. Now I'm going to read that in the voice in which it belongs. You ready? It is altogether possible that one may prefer lower government living standards in favor of a more humane distribution of wealth. It's Bernie Sanders. It's on the mark Bernie Sanders, okay? And they are now parroting this stuff. People on the supposed right are parroting this stuff because they like Donald Trump. That is not excusable. And it's not just Breitbart News, which you would expect, because Breitbart News is Breitbart News and they love Trump. Okay, that's fine. It's also Tucker Carlson. So Tucker Carlson has on Mark Cuban. Mark Cuban is a billionaire. And here is Tucker Carlson with Mark Cuban And Cuban, shockingly, is taking the more capitalist position. This is about H-1B visas. This is the program that allows people with high-tech degrees to come into the United States and work for a job. The reason that is good is because otherwise these companies are simply going to outsource the jobs, or they're going to move the company altogether. They're going to lower their labor costs or raise their prices. Okay, free flow of labor is a crucial ingredient to having lower prices and better product. Here is Tucker Carlson with Mark Cuban. Cuban is right, and Carlson's about to say something that is full-on Marxism. It's pretty crazy.
Would you apply market forces to your marriage, to your family? I mean, there are limits to how far. No, I'm serious. Capitalism is not a religion. It's an effective way of generating wealth. But to the extent it hurts Americans, shouldn't we respond? I mean, we don't do something just because it's like big consistent with capital. I don't know. You're the one who said, well, are you against capitalism? I like capitalism. But when it hurts Americans, I'm willing to make adjustments. Wouldn't you be?
Okay, stop. That's okay. When he says, would you apply market forces to your family, to your marriage? Market forces, what does that have to do with anything? A marriage is a voluntary agreement I make with my wife. Okay, that has nothing to do with market forces. I don't want the government intervening. Okay, we're talking about government interventionism now. And here's the crazy part. When he says capitalism is not a religion, it's an effective way of generating wealth. Capitalism is not only good because it generates more wealth and better products and services. Capitalism is good because it is virtuous. Okay, capitalism, the free market is virtuous. You know why the free market is virtuous? Because it says you own your own labor. You own your own money. You own the fruits of your own labor, and no one can tell you how to spend those fruits. No one can tell you with whom you can do trade. No one can tell you that you are not able to do trade because there's some other guy somewhere else who's been hurt because you're not doing trade with him. He'd be better off if you traded with him. If you were forced to trade with him, he'd be better off. So we're going to force you to trade with that guy instead. Okay, what Tucker Carlson says right there is anathema to conservatism. When he says, I like capitalism, but when it hurts Americans, I'm willing to make adjustments. That is Bernie Sanders' case. It is almost word for word Bernie Sanders' case. He says, I like capitalism, I like private property, but, whenever someone finishes with but, you know they're going to go in a direction that has nothing to do with capitalism or conservatism. And again, that's being done because people want to be loyal to Trump, not because it's actually good policy or anything like that. Okay, so I want to talk more about, the sort of corruption of conservatism that seems to be happening because we have allegiance to particular personalities and why we need to avoid that. Meanwhile, with all of this going on, it does demonstrate that the left really has no program at this point other than to shout and scream. But this is what I fear, going back to the sort of O'Reilly point and the point about economics and Trumpism, is that the Democrats are looking for a focal point. And one of the ways that they're going to find a focal point is if we on the right are willing to excuse bad behavior because we agree with the general things that people are saying. When we excuse bad things, we open the left we give the left an opening. Forget about the moral point that you should never defend immorality. You shouldn't be defending bad things as a general rule. But beyond that, you're also doing something that's bad politically because you're opening the door for the left to attack you. So with all of this O'Reilly stuff going on, you end up with people like Stephen Colbert, going after Bill O'Reilly openly now, and he feels he's justified in doing so because Fox News for years and years and years tolerated a culture where Bill O'Reilly's alleged behavior was allowed, apparently. So here's Stephen Colbert going after Bill O'Reilly. So he says, so he called him, what was this? A self-righteous landfill of sundry garbage, of angry garbage. Yeah, I mean, so he's just. And I mean, when you talk about a self-righteous landfill of angry garbage, I mean, Stephen Colbert is right there at the top of the list. Self-righteous, and he spent his entire career living off of Bill O'Reilly. He's actually got to be the saddest guy in the world that Bill O'Reilly just went away since he made his career off of him. But this is what the left loves. I mean, this is why the left loved it when the right basically looked the other way on some of the things that Donald Trump said. Elizabeth Warren is still trying to play that card. She says that Donald Trump won because he used an ugly stew of racism and sexism, and then she, for some reason, put on a headdress and started doing a rain dance, which was weird.
In his direction. How do you explain the difference between those types of outcomes you're describing, how people, I think, can usually intelligently perceive their own self-interest, and the way people vote?
Look, I talk about this in the book. Part of it is an ugly stew of racism. Part of it is Donald Trump tapped into anger. He got that people are deeply angry. They are angry that their kids can't graduate from school without getting crushed by student loan debt. Angry that there aren't good jobs being created right here. Angry that after a lifetime of working hard, you can't retire with a little dignity and security. And people are right to be angry. But Donald Trump said it's their fault. Those other people, those people who don't worship like you, those people who don't look like you, those people who aren't the same color as you. That was a big part. He told a story. It's just the wrong story. Donald Trump.
And this is the crap that they're going to pour onto Republicans. Every time Republicans look the other way on somebody doing something wrong, then this is what the left is going to pour on them. And then we're going to say, well, you're misconstruing it. Perfect example today. So Donald Trump invites Sarah Palin to the White House. Okay, that's fine. Sarah Palin should go to the White House. She's a big Trump supporter. She was one of the first people to support Trump, former governor of Alaska, former vice presidential candidate. And she brings along with her a couple of other people. She brings along with her Kid Rock and Ted Nugent. So, you know, who cares that Kid Rock went? I don't see why that's a big deal that Kid Rock was there. Obama used to have celebrities all the time. Ted Nugent is obviously a little bit of a different story. And the reason Ted Nugent is a different story is because Ted Nugent has put out some material that is, if not borderline racist, overtly racist or overtly anti-Semitic. During the last election cycle, he put out a graphic with a bunch of Jewish stars on people who he disagreed with. He's also put out graphics of a van with the N-word on it. I mean, Ted Nugent is a very fringy guy. And so here's Trump having him at the White House. And then all of these people go and they pose in front of a picture of Hillary Clinton. Now, the reason that I think Trump did this, I mean, it's troll level 1,000, obviously. You're having in all these people who said that Obama wasn't born in America, wasn't an American citizen. You're having in, you know, that's who Ted Nugent is. You're having those people stand in front of Hillary Clinton's picture to troll her. And, you know, it's funny. And I know that our side thinks that anything that is anti-Hillary Clinton is funny. But let's see it from the other side for just a second. Let's put the shoe on the other foot. We all complained when Jay-Z and Beyonce went to the White House and Jay-Z was wearing black nationalist jewelry. We all complained when Snoop Dogg was at the White House and was meanwhile saying nasty things about the police. We all complained about that. So we can't pretend that it's okay when the right does this, when we didn't like it when the left did that. And it opens the door. Now we're going to have a debate all day over whether Donald Trump is a racist again because Ted Nugent was there. Okay, that's just an unforced error, and I understand that people on the right are going to go, well, that's just because people on the left don't understand the culture that's outside of Washington, D.C. and New York City. They don't understand people who are blue-collar, who listen to Ted Nugent and like Ted Nugent. That may very well be true, but it doesn't matter when it comes to politics. It doesn't matter whether it's a matter of them understanding and whether there's a disconnect, or whether they are just going to use this as a club with which to beat Trump. It's a controversy Trump didn't need, and now Trump is going to have to deal with it. So I'm not sure how that's good for Trump. I also, just on general principle, am not a fan of the idea that somebody who, you know, tweets out vans with an N-word on it should be at the White House, whether that's a rapper or whether that is or whether that's a country music star. So I think it's an unforced error, and it gives the left another talking point that they're going to use. And I'm not in favor of giving the left useless talking points. This is not like a big win that you get something from. It's not even like you're making a big bargain here. You're bringing Ted Nugent to the White House, and the left's going to complain about it. The media will cover it for 3 days. Trump will say it's perfectly fine that Ted Nugent was there, and then people on the left will say, okay, well, what about Ted Nugent saying X, Y, and Z? And he'll say, well, I didn't know Ted Nugent said that, or he'll say, well, Ted Nugent said that, but it doesn't represent me. And they'll say, well, then why did you have him? That's going to be the conversation for the next 3 days because of this set of photos that was solely designed to just troll the left. Just not smart politics, not smart politics. Now, that said, it is true that the Democrats are unable to capitalize off of these mistakes because they're so over the top. So, you know, Sean Spicer is correct that the Democrats have been overplaying their hand on every score. Yesterday, he was talking about the Georgia election in the Georgia 6th, and he said that the Democrats lost there, but the media is trying to treat it like they won because they're overplaying their hand.
The Democrats went all in on this race. They spent over $8.3 million. They said on the record that their goal was to win this race. They lost. And the reaction has somewhat been, that they almost won. No, they lost. They made very clear what their goal was in this race. They spent $8.3 million and threw everything, including the kitchen sink, at it and lost. And so, 2 months left, though, right? No, not in terms of what their stated goal was. They said that their goal last night was to win the race with over 50%. They spent $8.3 million. They didn't run for a runoff. They ran to win last night, and they lost.
Okay, so it's just, and he's right. He's right. Camille Paglia also says that she's a professor, feminist professor who's on the left. She says Democrats have overplayed their hand, and she's totally right.
You know, my feeling is that an election occurred, okay, and it's incumbent on the defeated party to pull itself together, or else we're going to get a re-election of the present administration. And that's what I feel right now.
You feel like he's going to get re-elected?
Yes. Yeah. I think that the Democrats have overplayed their hand. I just can't imagine more.
Well, you're already betting on his re-election less than 100 days in.
Yes, because of what the Democrats needed to do, and what the major media, Frank, needed to do, okay, was to do some soul.
And by that you mean the failing New York Times.
Yes. Okay. Because
we're going to rebrand this failing Times Talks. There's been a lot of
And she's right. The Democrats keep overplaying their hand. I'm Ben Shapiro. This is The Ben Shapiro Show.